Hey everybody, welcome to lecture number 13 for the spring semester. We're going to begin, this is going to be one of two lectures dealing with the urinary system. We'll go through the basics of the urinary system. We'll talk about the glomerulus, the Bowman's capsule, the anatomy of the kidney in general, and then we'll talk about urine production, and that will cover the first lecture. So let's get started. Okay, so the urinary system rids the body of all or most waste products, not all, liquid waste at least. Kidneys also play an important role in your blood volume, your blood pressure, and your blood composition. The urinary system is very closely associated with the reproductive system and is collectively called the urogenital system. We will not be talking about the reproductive organs in this particular chapter. We will discuss those organs in a subsequent chapter after this, but they are extremely closely connected. Most of the urinary system will run alongside or with the reproductive organs. Okay, so here we can see a basic diagram of the urinary system, and that urinary system is going to start with the kidneys. Okay. Obviously, with the blood vessels that enter and exit the kidneys, which are the renal veins and arteries. Okay, we have our ureter, which is this tube that goes all the way down here from both kidney. And then we have our urinary bladder, which collects our urine and then exits through the urethra in both male and females. Okay, we will basically be looking at just the kidney portion today, and we will look at the rest in our next lecture. Let's get rid of that. Okay, so your kidneys are going to filter blood and excrete toxic and metabolic wastes. It's going to regulate, like I said before, your blood volumes, how much blood you have. It's going to regulate your blood pressure and your osmolarity. It's going to regulate electrolytes and your acid-base balances. It's going to secrete erythropoietin, which stimulates the production of red blood cells. So when you need new red blood cells, you need this hormone called erythropoietin. It's going to help regulate calcium levels by participating in what we call calcitrol synthesis. It's going to clear hormones from your blood. It's going to detoxify free radicals. Free radicals are things that can cause cancer. Okay, we don't want those, so you want to get those out of the body as quickly as possible. And while in starvation mode, they will synthesize glucose or blood sugar from amino acids. Okay, so they can take amino acids, which are very rich in nitrogen, and convert those into glucose that you can use for ATP production in your cells. That's only going to happen if you're in some type of starvation situation where you have not eaten, or if you have a very low level of natural sugars or glucose in your bloodstream from carbohydrates and things like that. Okay, what are wastes? Okay, so wastes are any substance that is used or useless to the body or present in excess of the body's needs. So if you a good example of something that's in excess of the body's needs would be things like vitamins and minerals. Okay, vitamins can only be absorbed in certain amounts. If you intake too many, or if you go over that amount of absorbable vitamins, you will not absorb them anymore. It's like if you can only absorb a certain amount of vitamin C in your diet. So if you go over that limit of vitamin C intake, your body will just get rid of it instead of trying to absorb it. Okay, then there are things that are useless to the body. Okay, like fecal matter and solid waste and things like that. Okay, metabolic wastes are waste substances produced by the body. Urea formation happens in the kidney. And that's when we take amino acids, break them down into, take proteins, break those down into their amino acid building blocks. Then we take away our amino group or amine group from our amino acids. That will then form ammonia, which we cannot really live with. Okay, we don't want our body to have ammonia in it. So we take that ammonia and we convert it into urea, which is then eventually produced, going to be made into urine, which we then rid our body of. Okay, uric acid is a product of nucleic acid catabolism. So when we eat animals and we eat plant material that has DNA in it, okay, DNA has nucleic acids. Okay, DNA is made of A's, T's, G's, and C's, which are different types of nucleic acids: adenine, guanine, thymine, and cytosine. And when we have to get rid of those, okay, we have to break them down, okay, which is going to produce uric acid as a product. Okay, creatine. This was a very popular weightlifting supplement in the late 90s, early 2000s. I believe it still is, but it reached its peak popularity in the early 2000s when people started, taking creatine as a weightlifting supplement to get bigger muscles. Okay, but creatine is a very natural substance that occurs in your foods, in plant materials, and your body. Creatine is naturally found in the body, just not in the amounts that people would take it to build a lot of muscle. But your kidneys do have to deal with the creatine that's in your system. So the more creatine you put in your system, the more your kidneys have to deal with it, and that's why it's it's kind of like a hot topic of discussion in the health and nutrition world, where too much creatine could be bad for your kidneys. Okay, your blood urea nitrogen, or your BUN levels, are part of your nitrogenous wastes. So basically what your BUN level is, it's the level of nitrogen waste in your blood. You don't want that to be too high, okay, because you can have kidney failure if that happens. Okay, a normal concentration of blood urea is about 10 to 20 milligrams per deciliter. Okay, azotemia, okay, which is a condition where these BUN levels are elevated, and that could indicate renal insufficiency. So if you are given, if your doctor feels that you might have some type of kidney failure, they are going to look at your BUN level. Okay, they're going to look at your blood urea nitrogen level, and if that is high, then that could be an indication that your kidneys are not working as well as they possibly could. Okay, uremia, okay, are high levels of waste. When you have high levels of waste in your blood, that could cause diarrhea, could cause vomiting, could cause cardiac arrhythmia, okay, stemming from the toxicity of these waste products. You don't want to have waste products floating around in your blood if you don't need to. Okay, treatments for that could be hemodialysis, which is, filtering the blood, or basically taking your blood out of you, filtering it through a machine, and then giving it back to you. Okay, that's what dialysis is basically, or organ transplants, getting a new kidney. Okay, but that is something that is very, that's your last kind of form of treatment, because it's so difficult to get. Okay, so here are some really major nitrogen wastes that your body encounters on a daily basis. Okay, here's ammonia. This is the same stuff that's in like Windex or any type of cleaning product. You're going to have ammonia in a lot of those cleaning products. Okay, and we don't want that in our body. We need to get rid of that. Here's what urea looks like, and I don't need you guys to memorize these chemical structures. I just kind of want you to see what they kind of have in common, right? And one big thing that they all have in common is this presence of nitrogen, which is why they're called nitrogen wastes, right? That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so here's uric acid, here's creatine, okay, and these are the things that our body wants to try to get rid of. Okay, the term excretion refers to separating waste from the body fluids and eliminating them. Okay, so when we excrete something, we want to separate. We want to take away the wastes from the fluids that we need, right? Where we need certain fluids, and we want to filter those fluids so that the wastes inside those fluids are not being kept in our body, so that they can hurt us. We don't want those there. Okay, 4 body systems carry out excretion, and these are the 4 body systems, right? You have the respiratory system. Okay, your respiratory system gets rid of carbon dioxide and other gases. Your integumentary system, which is your skin. Okay, that gets rid of water, inorganic salts, lactic acid. Okay, urea in your sweat. Okay, that's why your sweat tastes salty. Okay, if you ever, or it stings sometimes. Okay, the lactic acid will make it sting when it hits your eyes or something like that. Okay, your digestive system, which we looked at already, that's going to excrete water, salt, carbon dioxide, lipids, bile pigments from your liver and gallbladder. It's going to get rid of cholesterol and other metabolic wastes. And your urinary system, which is what we're talking about now, which is going to get rid of toxins, drugs, hormones, salts, hydrogen ions, as well as some water. Okay, we don't want to get rid of too much water, but we want to get rid of some water. Okay. So the kidneys. Okay, kidneys are the major organ of the urinary system. Okay, it lies against the posterior abdominal wall around thoracic vertebrae 12. Thoracic vertebrae 12 or lumbar vertebrae 3. Okay, so it's not exactly all in your lower back. It's more in your mid-back area. Okay, so half of your kidney is kind of underneath your rib cage. The rest of your kidney is kind of, there's a little portion of your kidney that peaks below the rib cage. So your kidneys are kind of in the middle of your back. Okay, so they're posterior to your abdominal wall, which means they're behind your abdominal wall. Okay, the right kidney is slightly lower than the left kidney due to the right lobe of the liver. The right lobe of the liver kind of, dips down. So if we're looking at the liver from behind a person, okay, the liver kind of has this shape to it. If you're looking at a posterior version of the liver, okay, and because of this lower right lobe, okay, that kidney has to sit a little bit lower than the left kidney. Okay, if we're looking from a posterior angle. Okay, rib 12 crosses the midline of the left kidney. So that's where rib number 12 would be. That would be your last rib. Okay, so your last rib. So more of your right kidney hangs below your rib cage than your left kidney does. Okay, it is retroperitoneal along with the uterus, the urinary bladder, the renal artery and vein, which means it's behind the peritoneum, as well as the renal arteries, veins, and the adrenal glands. Okay, so here is a diagram of what I was just talking about. So here's like your mid-back. Okay, this individual's rib cage would be, somewhere along here. Okay, maybe a little bit further down since that's where the little piece of glass is. So half of the kidney will be sitting there, and then on this right kidney will be a little bit lower. Okay, because of the liver that's in front of it. Okay, this is, your thoracic vertebrae would be here. And then your lumbar vertebrae would start around there and go down. Okay, so if we did a transverse cut of this individual and remove their top half from them, and we look down into the remaining lower half, this is what we would see on this side, right? So we can see the kidney here. We can see our renal arteries and veins. We can see our vertebral column. Okay, the other kidney would be on this side. Okay, we can see the ureter, portion of the ureter. Okay, so that's what it would look like from kind of like a bird's eye view, right? You're looking down into this individual. Okay, they're transversely cut, and then you look down into the individual like that. Okay, so your kidney is about the size of a bar of soap. Okay, that's not a very large organ. Obviously, the bigger the person is, the bigger their kidney is going to be. I've dissected kidneys of humans. I've dissected kidneys of cows and sheep. Okay, and obviously, the bigger the organism is, the bigger the kidneys are going to be. The lateral surface is convex. Okay, whoops, did it again. The lateral surface is convex, and the medial surface is concave. Okay, so you're going to get this kind of shape. So here's our lateral surface and our medial surface. Okay, There's a slit here in the medial surface called the hilum. Okay, just so we saw our hilum as well in the liver, right? And that hilum is going to receive the blood vessels, the renal arteries and veins, the nerves, lymphatics. The ureter is also going to go through this hilum as well. Okay, there are 3 protective connective tissue coverings on our kidney. We have the renal fascia, which is immediately deep to the peritoneum and binds to the abdominal wall. So that's going to be on the, basically the face of the kidney. It's going to be on the surface of the kidney, and it's going to bond your kidney to the abdominal wall. Okay, there's going to be a fat capsule, okay, that cushions the kidney and holds it in place. Okay, fat is a very, very good insulator. It's going to help keep heat into your body, and it's also going to help be a nice cushion so that when your body gets jostled around, your organs don't go slamming into one another, and your organs don't go slamming into other structures, which could hurt the organs, right? We don't want our kidney slamming into our vertebral column. Okay, our vertebral column is kind of sharp and pointy and hard, and that could damage, or your ribs for that matter. Okay, that could damage the kidney, the soft tissue of the kidneys. So this fat capsule is going to help hold it in place and cushion the kidney. And then lastly, we have the fibrous capsule, which is going to enclose our kidney, protecting it from trauma, protecting it from infection. Okay, so lots of protection around our kidneys. Okay, here is an actual human kidney, and we're going to talk about many of these different portions. We're going to talk about the renal cortex. Whoops, I keep forgetting to get my pen back. Okay, we're going to talk about the renal cortex. We're going to talk about the medulla. We're going to be talking about the calyx or the calyces. We're going to talk about the renal artery, the sinuses, the veins, okay, the renal pelvis, and eventually the ureter, but that's not going to be in today's lecture. That'll be in next lecture. Okay, so let's talk about the gross anatomy of the kidney itself. Okay, so the renal parenchyma is going to be a combination of 2 things. It's going to be the cortex and the medulla, right? So let's see if I can go back and forth between the pictures. Okay, so here's our cortex. Here's our cortex out here, this kind of lighter area here, and it goes along the whole lateral side of our kidney. And then the medulla are these darker circles, or they're supposed to look like pyramids. Okay, when you see it in a drawing, they kind of have more of a pyramid shape to them. Okay, but that's the medulla. Okay, not to be confused with the medulla of the brain, right? Different medulla. Okay, so our renal cortex is this outermost edge here, and then our medulla are these darker pyramid shapes. There's going to be another one here as well. Okay, our darker pyramid shapes, more medial, okay, in our kidney. And that's going to be our parenchyma. The renal parenchyma includes both of those. And that's where urine is going to be produced, in that parenchyma. Okay, it appears as a C shape in the frontal section. That's what we were just looking at. It encirculates the renal sinuses, okay, which we looked at already as well. Go back. Okay, so here's our renal sinuses. Here. Okay, those are our renal sinuses, and this parenchyma is going to surround it in this kind of C shape. Okay, the renal sinus is a cavity that contains blood and lymphatic vessels. It's going to contain nerves and places for urine to collect when it's being produced. Okay, adipose or fat is going to fill the remaining cavity and hold all of these different structures in place. So we'll have little pockets of fat in here that are going to hold all these little structures in place. Okay, so again, the 2 zones of the parenchyma are called the renal cortex and the renal medulla. I'm going to be going back and forth between this picture and maybe this picture as well. Here you can see this is a drawing. You can see more of the pyramid shapes of the medulla here. Okay, and you can see the cortex on the outside. Okay, but I'm going to be flipping back and forth between these 2 pictures. Okay, so you have the outer renal cortex and the inner renal medulla. The renal columns are extensions of the cortex that project inward towards the sinuses. Okay, so we can see those in here. Okay, these are my projections of the medulla pyramids. Okay, the renal tubule is a long coiled tubule that converts filtrate into urine. Whoops, I'm sorry. I skipped ahead. Okay, the renal pyramids, you have about 6 or 10 of them. You can see them here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, those are my renal pyramids. Okay, the lobe of the kidney is one pyramid and its overlaying cortex. Okay, so this would be one lobe of the kidney. This would be another lobe of the kidney, another lobe of the kidney. Okay, so that's what we call lobes of the kidneys. Okay, you have things called calyx or calyces. Okay, so you have major and minor calyces. The minor calyx is a cup that nestles the papilla of each pyramid and collects urine. Okay, so right here, okay, would be a minor calyce. Here would be a minor calyce. Here is a minor calyx, minor calyx, minor calyx, minor calyx. Okay, so all of these collecting ducts that come off of these medulla pyramids are going to be minor calyces. Okay, they will then form, when they all converge into one place, they will converge into something called a major calyx. Okay, so if we take a look at the picture again, this minor calyce, this minor calyce, and this minor calyce are all going to form this one large calyx that we call the major calyx. Okay, so we have our medulla, our minor calyx, many minor calyx, like 2 or 3 of them, converge into a major calyx here. Same thing over here, 1 minor calyx, 2 minor calyx, 3 minor calyx is going to be within a major calyx. Okay. The renal pelvis is formed by the major calyces. Okay, so here is our renal pelvis. Okay, you can see it here is our renal pelvis. Okay, so minor calyx. Let me write this down for you. Okay, minor calyx into a major calyx. Here, minor into a major. And here is our renal pelvis. Okay, which eventually leads into our ureter, which goes to our urinary bladder. Okay, so the minor calyx, they converge into a major calyx. Those major calyxes converge into a renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis eventually goes into our ureter, which is where urine drains down into the bladder. Okay, so urine is going to get produced here. It's going to collect in these minor calyces, kind of like gutters, right? And then those gutters, like primary gutters almost, which lead into a secondary gutter, which lead into the main gutter. Okay, and then out, down your house or whatever else, right? So urine's going to form in here, drip into the minor calyces. Minor calyces are all going to drip into this major calyx. All these major calyces are going to drip into the renal pelvis, and the renal pelvis will eventually give it to the urinary bladder. Okay. The kidney is made of something called a nephron. Okay, the nephron is going to be the major structural component of the kidney that is going to produce urine for an individual. Kind of like neurons are the major cell for a nervous system. A nephron is a major structure, right? It's made of many, many cells, right? It's not just one cell. A neuron is one cell. So it's kind of a strange analogy that I'm trying to use, but the nephron is the major structure that we find in your kidneys that is going to produce urine. We have about 1.2 million nephrons in each one of our kidneys, and they are composed of 2 major parts, and those parts are called the renal corpuscle and the renal tubule. Okay, the renal corpuscle filters your blood plasma, and the renal tubule is going to help convert the filtrate, and the filtrate is going to be the things removed. Okay, things removed from your blood plasma. Okay, and it's going to convert that filtrate into urine. Okay, and we're going to learn about what the filtrate is composed of in a moment. Okay, the corpuscle itself is made of two things that we really need to understand. And one of those two things is called the glomerulus, and the other one is the thing that surrounds the glomerulus, which is called the Bowman's capsule. It can also be called the glomerular capsule. Okay, so this renal corpuscle, the thing that actually filters the blood, is going to be this glomerulus, and that glomerulus is going to be surrounded by a Bowman's capsule. And I'm going to show you pictures of this in a second. Okay, the outside of the glomerular capsule, or the Bowman's capsule, is going to be made of simple squamous epithelium. And the inner layer of the glomerulus, okay, will be made of things called podocytes. Okay, and these podocytes are going to be unique to the glomerulus, and they're going to be the cell-producing bodies of the glomerulus. Okay, this is the entire renal corpuscle, right? So if we go back, the renal corpuscle is the part that filters the blood, and it's made of two things, the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. So this whole structure is the renal corpuscle. And the renal corpuscle is made of two things, the Bowman's capsule, okay, and the Bowman's capsule, or the glomerular capsule, is this outer structure here, okay, and it's also going to be made of the glomerulus, which is this entire squiggly structure here, okay. That's going to be the major components of the renal corpuscle. And we're going to talk about all the things that are going in and coming out of this, and I'm going to be flipping back and forth between this picture as we go forth. Okay. The vascular pole and the urinary pole. Okay. Basically what this says is where blood is entering and where urine is leaving. That's basically what these two things are. Okay. So the vascular pole is on the side of the corpuscle where the afferent arterial or the afferent artery, oops, I'm going to do it again, where the afferent artery enters the corpuscle and the efferent arteriole leaves the corpuscle. So let me go back one. Okay, so here is where blood is going to enter the renal corpuscle. Okay, because that's what we're doing, right? We're filtering blood, so we need to get blood into this corpuscle. So blood is going to flow inwards through this corpuscle. It's going to go through the filter mechanism, which is the glomerulus. You can see the blood cells in there. Okay. The blood itself is not filtered. The plasma of the blood is filtered. So all of those blood cells are going to leave after they get filtered. They're going to leave through the efferent arteriole, right? So all your blood, your whole blood, goes into the afferent arteriole. It gets filtered, and the stuff that gets filtered is then removed, okay, over here, which we'll get to in a moment. Okay, but whatever isn't removed, okay, goes back into the bloodstream. Okay, all your red blood cells, the plasma is going to go back into your blood flow. Okay, your plasma itself is not removed from your blood, just there are things in the plasma that we want to filter out, right? So there are little tiny things that we're going to talk about that are in the plasma that we want to get out of the plasma, things like toxins and drugs and, you know, various other things, glucose, fatty acids, things like that. We want to get those out. We want to filter them, but we also want to give back all that plasma and all those red blood cells. Okay, so it enters through the afferent and leaves through the efferent. Okay, so this whole area is called the vascular pole, right? Okay, that's our vascular pole. The other side, where things leave, okay, where the stuff that we filtered out leaves, okay, over here, that's going to be the urinary pole. Okay, that's going to be the opposite side of the corpuscle where the renal tubule begins. Okay, so this is going to be where the renal tubule starts, right? So our renal corpuscle is the first major part of the nephron, and then the renal tubule is the second major portion of a nephron. Okay, so this is the corpuscle. Blood enters the corpuscle, filters out all the stuff, and then gives that to the tubule, which is going to be here at the urinary pole of the nephron. Okay. So the tubule, the renal tubule, is that duct that leads away from the glomerulus, or the Bowman's capsule, and ends at the tip of the medullary pyramid of the kidney. We can divide it into four major regions. Okay, number one is the proximal convoluted tubule, or the PCT. You're going to see that here. You see it right there. You're going to see that a lot, so please understand what it means. You have something called the Nephron Loop, which is also called the loop of Henle. Okay. You have the distal convoluted tubule, or the DCT. And then you have what we call the collecting ducts. Okay, so those are the four parts. So we have our proximal convoluted tubule, we have our loop of Henle, we have our distal convoluted tubule, and we have our collecting duct. Those are our four major parts of the renal tubule. Okay. The proximal convoluted tubule arises from that Bowman's capsule. Okay. So if we go back to our picture here, okay, here's our Bowman's capsule, or our glomerular capsule, and here's our proximal convoluted tubule, and that's the very, very beginning of our renal tubule. Okay. The PCT is the longest and most coiled region. We'll see that in a moment. And the PCT, simple cuboidal epithelium with microvilli, are going to be in our PCT for absorption. We want to absorb and filter things out of your blood. So we're going to need epithelial cells that have microvilli on them in order to do so. Okay, the Nephron loop, or the loop of Henle, is a very long U-shaped portion of the renal tubule, and we'll see that in a moment as well. There's a descending limb and an ascending limb. The thick portions of it have cuboidal epithelium in them. The thin segments have simple squamous epithelium in them. Okay, so that would be number 2, Nephron loop. Number 3, the distal convoluted tubule begins after the ascending limb re-enters the cortex of the kidney. They're shorter and less coiled than the proximal convoluted tubule, and they are not going to have microvilli. And the distal convoluted tubule is going to be the end of our nephron. After that, we will have the collecting duct, which is going to receive fluids from those distal convoluted tubules, and it's going to do so through several different nephrons, right? So this collecting duct is going to have many distal convoluted tubules feeding into it as it passes through the medulla of the kidneys. Okay, numerous collecting ducts converge towards the tip of the medullary pyramid, which is going to result in what we call the papillary duct. And we have 30 papillary ducts ending in the tip of each papilla, which is then going to allow whatever is collected to pass eventually into our bladder. Okay, so here's the flow of fluid from the point where the glomerular filtrate is formed in the glomerulus to the point where urine leaves the body, right? So we start off with our glomerular capsule, or our Bowman's capsule, right? That's our Bowman's capsule. Okay, and that's going to be that circular capsule, and inside is the glomerulus. Okay. Coming out of that is going to be our proximal convoluted tubule. We're going to have something called the loop of Henle, which we'll see like that, which will end in our distal convoluted tubule, which will then go into a collecting duct, to a papillary duct, which ends in the minor calyx of each medulla, which then goes, so you have many of these things, right? You'll have a lot of minor calyces going into a major calyce, okay, which then enters out into the renal pelvis, which then goes into our ureter, which then goes to our bladder, which then goes to the urethra, which is where we urinate from. Okay, that's basically the pathway of how urine is produced and then excreted from the body. This is a great question for a test. Just a heads up. Okay, the correct flow is a very good question that I could put on an exam. So here is what I just drew. Okay, but this is a much better drawing of what I just did, right? So we have our We have our blood going into our renal corpuscle. Our renal corpuscle is made of the outer capsule called the Bowman's capsule or the glomerular capsule. Inside of that capsule is our glomerulus, which is actually going to be doing the filtering. So the blood enters, gets filtered, and then the blood goes back out. Okay. Here is our proximal convoluted tubule. Okay, that's where the Bowman's capsule converges with this with the renal tubule, right? At the proximal convoluted tubule. It's very twisty, right? Notice that. Notice how it's very twisted up there. And then we get to the loop of Henle, or the nephron loop. Okay, and this is the nephron loop. It's this big U-shaped structure. Okay. We have our ascending limb here going up. We have our descending limb here going down. Okay, so our descending limb here and our ascending limb up here. Okay, we have a thick segment here and here, which are going to differ from the thin segments in their epithelial types. This loop of Henle is going to end in the distal convoluted tubule here. There's our distal convoluted tubule. That distal convoluted tubule ends in a collecting duct, and many collecting ducts from neighboring nephrons are going to enter or join this collecting duct, and that will form a papillary duct, which will then go into a minor calyx, and then into a major calyx, and then to our renal pelvis, into our, eventually our bladder, or a ureter, and then to our bladder. Okay, so it's really not all that crazy. Okay, the names are a bit intense, right? Glomerulus, Bowman's capsule, convoluted tubules. These names are intense, but it's a very, very easy flow, right? So you have, just trying to break it down for you, right? So you have the renal capsule, which goes into the renal tubule. Spelled that wrong, but that's okay. You get it. Renal tubule into the ureter, into the bladder. That's basically, and then into the urethra. That's a really simplified version of that, right? There's lots of stuff in the renal capsule, right? You have your Bowman's capsule, you have your glomerulus, all right? And that's going to be the renal capsule, those two things, all right? The Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. Then the renal tubule will start, okay, and be all loopy. And that will lead into the loop of Henle, which will then go to your distal convoluted tubule. So here's your proximal convoluted tubule. Here's your loop. Here's your distal convoluted tubule, which will then lead into the bladder and the ureter and the bladder and everything else. Okay, why is this called the proximal convoluted tubule? And why is this one the distal? Look at which one's closer to the Bowman's capsule, right? Proximal means closer, distal means further away, right? So this tubule here is closer to the Bowman's capsule, so we call it the proximal convoluted tubule. This one is further away, so we call it the distal convoluted tubule. Very easy. Okay, and all this stuff, basically what's going on here is that blood is going in, the plasma is being filtered, the stuff that's filtered is either given back to the blood or it's released from the body as waste. And that's what the next part of this is going to be about. Okay. Before we get to that, let's just talk about the two different types of nephrons that we have in the body. We have juxtamedullary nephrons and we have cortical nephrons. Those are the two nephrons that you have in the body. Okay. 15% of them are juxtamedullary nephrons, and the rest, the majority of the nephrons that you have, are going to be cortical nephrons. Okay. The main difference between the two different types of nephrons is in structural wise. Okay, juxtamedullary nephrons have very, very long nephron loops. Okay, where cortical nephrons have very short nephron loops, and I'm going to show you a picture of this in a moment. The major functionality difference is that the juxtamedullary nephrons dilute your urine. Okay, they're going to help dilute urine to help conserve water. Okay, so the dilution of your urine is going to come from juxtamedullary nephrons, not cortical nephrons. Okay, and we'll take a look at them here. So here on the left-hand side, we have our juxtamedullary nephrons, which are with very short nephron loops. Okay, I'm sorry, with very long nephron loops. Okay, we have very long nephron loops here. Where here in the cortical nephrons, we have shorter nephron loops. And your juxtamedullary nephrons are going to deal with diluting your urine, where your cortical nephrons are going to be more for the filtration aspect of it. Okay. So the last thing that we want to discuss, and it's still a good portion of what we need to talk about, is how urine is formed. Okay. Now urine is formed in these 4 steps. Okay. Glomerular filtration. So that's the filtration of the blood plasma in the glomerulus. Okay. That's going to form what we call a filtrate. Okay. A filtrate is what is filtered out of the plasma. Okay. After the stuff gets filtered, you're going to have what we call tubular reabsorption. And that's going to remove useful solutes from the filtrate and give them back to the blood, right? So there are things that we're going to filter out that we don't necessarily want to get rid of, that are helpful to us. And we want to give those things back to the blood because we don't want to throw away good stuff. Okay, after that, we're going to have tubular secretion, which is going to take or remove the wastes that that are left, right? So after we take the good things out, we're going to be left with, stuff that's not really great for us that we want to get rid of in the first place, and that's going to be secreted by tubular secretion. And then the last thing we're going to do is we're going to have water conservation, which is going to remove water from your urine and concentrate your urine and concentrate the wastes. We don't want to have highly watered down urine. We want to take that water out of the urine and give it back to the body whenever we can. So now we're going to go through each one of these steps individually and take a look at how this is done. Okay. So we just went through those 4 steps. So number 1, the glomerular filtrate, just to understand what that is, it's the fluid in the capsular space between the glomerulus and the Bowman's capsule. Okay, it's going to be similar to blood plasma, except that no protein is going to be present in that blood plasma. Your blood plasma has lots of proteins in it, okay, especially albumin, okay, but we don't want that protein in our glomerular filtrate. Okay, we're going to have tubular fluid, which is going to be fluid from the proximal convoluted tubule through the distal convoluted tubule. That's all the fluid that travels in the renal tubule from the PCT to the DCT. Okay, these substances have been removed or added by tubular cells in the kidney. And then lastly, we have what we will end up with is urine, which is fluid that enters the collecting ducts after the distal convoluted tubule. And it undergoes very little alteration at that point, except for changes in water content. If we need our urine to be more concentrated, then we remove water. If we want it to be less concentrated, we can add water to it, depending on the condition that our body is in at the moment and if we're doing any particular actions. Okay. What we see here is glomerular filtration membrane, right? So this is the area in which the glomerulus is going to allow things to exit or stay within the blood, right? So here we have our flowing blood, and we're going to take stuff out of that blood, right? So our blood consists of our solid parts, our blood cells, and our plasma, which is the liquid portion. There are certain things we want out of our blood, and there are certain things we want to keep in our blood. The red blood cells are going to stay in, right? Because they can't move past this barrier. Okay, this filtration pore is going to be where things that are small enough can move from the glomerulus into that space in between the Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus. Okay, so blood cells cannot move through there, so blood cells will stay. Okay, so there's things that stay. Number one, blood cells. Two, plasma proteins. Okay, we don't want the proteins, like I said before, we don't want our proteins to move into the filtrate. Okay, we want our proteins to stay in our blood plasma. So our albumin and all the other proteins that exist in our blood plasma are going to stay in here. Okay, protein-bound minerals and hormones. Those are also going to stay in here. We want those protein-bound minerals and hormones to stay in our blood plasma. And any molecule that's greater than 8 nanometers in diameter is not going to fit through this pore. Okay, what is going to get past and what is going to be filtered in our filtrate? Okay, water can move past here. Okay, electrolytes like sodium and potassium can move past here. Glucose can get past here. Amino acids, very small macromolecules. Fatty acids, these are all building blocks of macromolecules, can get past there. Like I said earlier in this video, vitamins can get past there, like vitamin C, okay? Urea, uric acid, creatine. I mentioned all these things at the beginning. All of those things are going to be filtered out of the blood, okay, in the glomerulus. So the glomerulus is going to filter these things out of your blood plasma and your blood, and it's going to leave these things in. Okay, so these stay in your blood. These are removed and therefore are called filtrate. Right? These are the things in my filtrate. Okay, and this is all in our space between the capsule and the glomerulus. Right? So if here's my capsule and here's my glomerulus, all these things are now hanging out in this space. And where are they going to go? They're eventually going to go to my proximal convoluted tubule. Okay. Okay, so almost any molecule smaller than 3 nanometers can pass through the filtration membrane, depending on what it is. Those things include water, electrolytes, glucose, fatty acids, amino acids, nitrogen wastes, and vitamins. We just looked at that on the list. Okay, some substances of low molecular weight are bound to the plasma proteins, like the albumin, and cannot get through the membrane. Examples of that could be calcium, iron, some hormones like thyroid hormones. Those things are not going to pass through the filtrate membrane. Kidney infections and trauma can damage this filtration membrane and allow proteins like albumin or blood cells to filter through, right? So if we go back, some types of kidney diseases can make this pore bigger. And if this pore gets bigger, bigger things can then fit through. Some things that can get through are proteins that we normally wouldn't pass through, or blood cells that normally wouldn't pass through. So if you're a doctor, or if you're a patient and you go to a doctor and that doctor finds that there's albumin in your urine, okay, right? Because anything that gets past this, anything that goes past this is going to end up in your urine, right? Anything that passes this filtrate, okay, could end up in your urine. It doesn't have to, because some of this stuff's going to be reabsorbed, right? Water is going to be reabsorbed, electrolytes, glucose. These things are going to get reabsorbed, but there are other things that pass through into your urine, okay? And these are normal things that you find in your urine, okay? But if you find things that shouldn't be there, right? None of these should be in your urine, right? All of these things should stay in your bloodstream. You shouldn't have any of these in your urine. So if you find blood cells in the urine, if you find proteins like things like albumin found in your urine, that's going to tell a doctor that something's wrong here, right? Something is awry in this area, because this is the area where these things should not be able to cross. And if things are getting across this area, something's wrong with your kidney function. Okay. So for example, albuminuria. Okay, albuminuria is the presence of protein in your urine. Okay, that is that could be caused by trauma or damage to the membrane of the kidney. Hematuria, okay, that's the presence of blood in your urine. Okay, this happens to boxers a lot. Okay, boxers have a tendency to get hit in their backs near their kidneys, okay, and could cause hematuria. Okay, many times distance runners and swimmers can experience temporary albuminuria, and hematuria. Prolonged strenuous activity can reduce the perfusion of the kidney, and the glomerulus deteriorates under prolonged hypoxia, which is basically you're holding your breath, right? So if you do that over time, okay, that could potentially give you one of those two disorders, but usually it's temporary for those particular individuals and it goes away. But you don't want to continuously have that happen to you, right? If that continuously happens, it becomes chronic. That can definitely become an issue. Okay. GFR refers to glomerular filtration rate, right? So how fast your glomerulus filters things. Okay. If the GFR is too high, if that rate of filtration is too high, fluid will flow through the renal tubules too rapidly for them to reabsorb. And you will basically get more urine output. Okay. What happens there, if you can't reabsorb things like water and you can't reabsorb other solutes, those solutes are going to be removed from the body, right? So let's think about that, right? There's going to be a lot of water reabsorption in the kidney so that your body stays hydrated. And if your filtration is happening at too high of a rate, the water cannot be reabsorbed. So therefore, it's going to stay in your urine, right? The water will stay in the urine and then it will be removed from your body when you urinate. And if you're urinating the water that was supposed to be reabsorbed, what's going to happen to you is you're going to become dehydrated. Okay, and we don't want that to happen. Okay, we're also going to have low electrolytes because these electrolytes are going to stay in the urine as well instead of being reabsorbed. We want those to be reabsorbed. And that is a very typical symptom of dehydration, is that your electrolytes are low. On the other hand, if your filtration is too slow, right? If it's not going fast enough, what happens is, yes, your water will be reabsorbed into the body, but also your wastes are going to be reabsorbed into the body. And that's a big no-no. We do not want our wastes to go back into our body. You wouldn't take something out of the garbage and put it back in your refrigerator, would you? Same thing here. We do not want the wastes that our body has gotten rid of to go back into our body, right? Because then we're just going to have a buildup and buildup and buildup of wastes over time. And what can that cause? That can cause this, azotemia, which is an excess of nitrogen products in our blood that can cause renal failure or kidney failure. Okay, we don't want that. So if it's too high, we're going to dehydrate ourselves. If it's too low, we're going to poison ourselves, essentially. And we don't want either one of those. Okay, what is this rate? How do we control the rate, right? The rate of filtration is controlled by glomerular blood pressure. That's going to be the major thing here. The blood pressure that goes into the glomerulus is going to really be the thing that controls how much filtration is going to happen, right? If the pressure is really high, filtration will happen too fast. If the pressure is too low, the rate will slow down. Okay, so what is going to control that rate, or what's going to control that pressure? Okay, renal autoregulation, sympathetic nervous system control, and hormonal control. So let's take a look at those individually. Okay, renal autoregulation is the ability of the nephrons, okay, in the kidney to adjust their own blood flow, right? So your kidney itself auto-regulates, right? It does it on its own. Your kidney will know what's going on in the rest of the body, and if it sees a increase in blood pressure, it will slow down its own blood pressure, right? It will constrict blood flow in the actual kidney itself. Okay, so the ability of the nephron to adjust their own blood flow and GFR without external control. So we don't need the nervous system to be involved here. We don't need hormones to be used here. It's the kidney itself doing it on its own. Okay, this enables the kidney to maintain a relatively stable flow rate in spite of the changes in your blood pressure, right? So if you are exercising, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in a minute, but if you're exercising, your blood pressure is going up. If you're getting excited, your blood pressure is going up. That increase in systemic blood pressure could affect your kidneys if your kidneys do not auto-regulate, right? But your kidneys will be notified of the systemic blood pressure rise. Okay, and it will then auto-regulate itself in different ways. Okay, your sympathetic nervous system can also affect the flow of blood pressure in your glomerulus. Okay, sympathetic nerve fibers richly innervate the renal blood vessels. Sympathetic nervous system and adrenal epinephrine constrict the arterioles, right? So your blood vessels can actually be constricted, which means they can be made smaller in diameter, right? And especially during strenuous exercise, right? When you're exercising, you might notice that you don't necessarily have to go to the bathroom while you're exercising. Okay, usually you have to go when you're done exercising or soon thereafter, but for the most part, you don't really feel the need to go to the bathroom, or you shouldn't really feel the need to go to the bathroom while doing that strenuous activity. I play hockey, for instance, and it's very rare that I ever have the feeling to urinate during a game. Okay, and that's because my sympathetic nervous system is constricting the blood flow into my kidneys. Okay, it's actually redirecting the blood away from the kidneys, right? My body knows that I'm doing some type of activity that requires lots of energy. So it's actually taking the blood and redirecting it from my kidneys. It would normally go to my kidneys, but it's redirecting it, giving it to my brain, giving it to my heart, giving it to my muscles so that I can perform the activity and not necessarily have to go to the bathroom, right? It's not doing it so I don't go to the bathroom. It's doing it so I perform, right? It's all about performance. Okay. It's all about performing. Okay. And your body wants you to be able to do that performing as best as possible. So it's going to redirect the blood from the kidneys to other places that need that blood. Why? Because what's in that blood? Oxygen's in that blood. Oxygen gives you ATP, which is energy, and that energy should help you perform better, right? But that is going to reduce the rate of filtration in the glomerulus, and that is going to decrease the amount of urine that you are producing at that moment, right? So you're not going to produce a lot of urine while you're doing some type of strenuous activity. Okay, so now let's talk about tubular reabsorption and secretion. So just to go back to the picture, okay, we've done this part, right? We've done glomerular filtration. Now we're moving on to tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. So we're going to tackle number 2 and 3 here now. Okay, so the conversion of the glomerular filtrate to urine involves the removal and addition of chemicals by these processes of tubular reabsorption and secretion. Okay, so we've gotten a filtrate now. We have some type of stuff removed from your blood plasma. And we want to take that removed stuff that we call our filtrate, and we want to convert that into urine. Okay, and we do so by tubular reabsorption and secretion. This starts at the proximal convoluted tubule, and it ends at the distal convoluted tubule. All right, so here's our glomerulus. Okay, step 1, our glomerular filtration happened there. Step 2 is going to happen here at the PCT, through the loop of Henle, and out the DCT. All of this is going to be steps 2 and step 3, right? Tubular absorption, reabsorption, and tubular secretion are going to happen here. Okay. So this occurs through the PCT all the way through the DCT. The fluid that was removed here, okay, all the filtrate that was removed here or produced here is going to be modified during this flow here. Okay, from its journey from the proximal to the distal convoluted tubule, that filtrate is going to be modified. Okay. Okay, once again. Now notice I want you to see just one term here. We want to see the renal tubule because we're going to mention that in the upcoming notes in a moment. Okay, but now you can see here's our flow of blood. It leaves through a capillary, okay, peritubular capillary. So this blood flow enters the glomerulus, gets filtered, okay, and then gets put back into this peritubular capillary. And what's removed here is our filtrate. Okay, so that was step 1. And now this filtrate is going to go down our PCT, our loop of Henle, and our DCT, which is going to deal with tubular reabsorption and tubular secretion. Okay, so tubular reabsorption is the process of reclaiming water and solutes from the tubular fluid and returning them to the blood. Okay, so what are we, besides water, what are these other solutes, right? So there's stuff in the filtrate. So my filtrate is this, these little dots. Of these little dots, all these little dots are things that passed through. Okay, here's our Bowman's capsule. Here's our glomerulus. The blood went through the glomerulus and took all this stuff out, right? All these little dots are things taking out of the blood. Of these little things, okay, all of these little things are then going to go into the proximary convoluted tubule. And some of these things we want to return, right? Some of these little dots we want to bring back into the blood. And some of these things we want to continue during this journey to become urine, right? So some of these things go back to the blood. Some of these things are going to end up in the urine anyway. Okay. What do we want to return to the blood is my question. Water. We want water to return to the blood so we don't become dehydrated. We want glucose. We don't want glucose in our urine. We want glucose in our bloodstream. Okay, that glucose is going to be used for ATP production to make energy. We don't want it to relieve our body. Potassium. We want potassium to be in our bloodstream. We don't. This is going to help us help our skeletal muscles perform properly. Okay, we don't want potassium in our urine. Amino acids. Okay, amino acids, we need them to build proteins in our bodies. We don't need them in our urine. So these things we want to give back to the body so that they can be used for functions. The rest of the stuff, whatever that other stuff is, okay, and we're going to take a look at some of that other stuff, but some of that other stuff we want out, and that stuff will stay in our convoluted tubule, our loop of Henle, and our distal convoluted tubule, and eventually become urine. Okay, this reabsorbed fluid is taken up by that peritubular capillary and given back to the blood. So these things are all going to be put back into our peritubular capillary, which is going to then be put back into our blood. So let me go back real quick. Okay, we can see here's our green arrow. Okay, our green arrow is when we, when we put back all of the stuff that we took out. So we took out a whole bunch of stuff. Some of this stuff we want to go back in, right? So tubular reabsorption is when the stuff that we want to go back in leaves the convoluted tubules and goes back into our peritubular capillary, which then goes back to the bloodstream. Okay, so the water, the amino acids, the glucose, the potassium, okay, all that stuff is going to go back into this peritubular capillary, which then goes back into the blood. Okay. Tubular secretion. Okay, this is going to be renal tubule extracts, where the renal tubule extracts chemicals from capillary blood and secretes them into the tubular fluid. So this is when we're taking stuff away, right? So we've given stuff back to the blood that we need: water, glucose, potassium, things like amino acids, things like that. Now there are things that we want to get rid of. Okay. So what do we want to get rid of? Okay, we want to get rid of urea. Whoops, I'm going to do it. Okay, we want to get rid of urea. We want to get rid of uric acid. We want to get rid of bile salts and bile acids. We want to get rid of ammonia. All of this stuff was part of our filtrate. Okay, we want to get rid of creatine. Okay, we want to get rid of drugs. Okay, drugs could be illegal drugs. Drugs could also be drugs that were prescription that we've taken. Okay, morphine, penicillin, aspirin, all this stuff is filtered through your kidneys. Okay, some drugs must be taken up multiple times a day to keep up with renal clearance, right? So what's that mean is that means you might have to, take drugs 1, 2, 3 times a day because your kidneys are so good at getting rid of them that they leave your body before they're actually done working on you, or before they're done doing whatever it is that you need them to do. So you might have to take those drugs multiple times. Okay, this is also going to help in regulating the pH of your body fluids. Okay, if you get rid of things like hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions, these are things that are going to affect your blood pH. Okay, we want to get rid of certain hydrogen ions and bicarbonate ions to keep your blood pH at its normal levels. Okay, so these are things that we want to get rid of. So things we wanted to keep, water, amino acids, glucose, potassium ions, things like that. Those are things we wanted to keep. Things we want to get rid of: urea, uric acid, ammonia, bile salts, creatine, drugs, contaminants, things like that. Okay. And that's going to be done with tubular secretion, right? So tubular, excuse me, let's get rid of this first. Okay, so tubular reabsorption deals with keeping the good stuff. Okay, if we go back here, okay, tubular reabsorption is keeping the good stuff. And this is ridding or getting rid of bad stuff, right? So this was filter. And it basically filters everything. Filters the good, filters the bad, just really depends on the size of the stuff. Out of that filtrate, okay, all the stuff that we filtered, we're going to keep some of it, and we're going to get rid of some of it. Okay, so it's a pretty easy concept. A lot of confusing names, but pretty easy concept. Okay, the last thing is water conservation. Okay, we want to make sure that the body does not lose any excess water. So the kidney eliminates metabolic wastes. We just mentioned them all, so I'm not going to mention them again. Okay, you can go back to the last slide if you need it. Okay, but it's going to eliminate metabolic wastes from the body, but prevents water loss. We don't want that. As the kidney returns water to the tissue fluid in the bloodstream, the fluid remaining in the renal tubules will then pass as urine and becomes more concentrated. So the good stuff is given back. The bad stuff is getting transferred to the next section, and that bad stuff is going to then become more concentrated as urine as we go forward. Okay, so what's forward, right? Forward, we ended at the distal convoluted tubule. The next thing is going to be the collecting ducts, right? So all the bad stuff, okay, all the bad filtrate, okay, all of our bad filtrate has reached the distal convoluted tubule, right? Everything before this, we've kept the goods, right? We kept the water, we kept the amino acids, so on and so forth. We got rid of the drugs, the hydrogen ions, the bicarbonate ions, the urea, the uric acid, all that stuff. That's in our bad filtrate. That got to our distal convoluted tubule and has now been put into our collecting duct. Okay, the collecting duct begins in the cortex, right? That outermost section of the kidney, where it receives fluid from several nephrons. So several nephrons are going to dump into this collecting duct. The collecting duct runs through that medulla, right? So if I draw it down here, here's our kidney. Here are my pyramids of medulla. Okay, bear with me here. Okay, so this whole thing is going to begin in the cortex. Let me change my color up a little bit. It's going to begin in the cortex. It's going to run through the medulla. Okay, and this is happening in each one of these things, right? So we have all these filtrations. They're all going to go into the medulla. Okay, each one of these medulla are going to end here. And then we're going to have our minor calyces with our major calyces to our renal pelvis, which then goes to our ureter, right? So the CD, or the collecting duct, runs through our medulla and reabsorbs the water, making urine more concentrated, right? If you take water away, all you're leaving is more urine, right? So if you have a mixture of, like orange juice, for instance, okay, if you remove the water from the orange juice, you are left with orange juice concentrate, right? Which is much more concentrated orange juice than you would just have regular orange juice. So that's the same thing is happening here. So as it runs through the medulla, water is being reabsorbed, okay? And then what you're left with is much more concentrated urine. Okay, as urine passes through the increasingly salty medulla, water leaves by osmosis. So that's why the medulla that's how the medulla removes water content. Okay, how concentrated your urine becomes depends on your state of hydration, right? If you are highly hydrated, you have lots of water in your system, your urine will be a lot more diluted. Okay, if you are dehydrated, if you drink a lot of coffee, if you drink a lot of alcohol, you will become, or if you're doing a lot of exercising and not replenishing your water and you're dehydrated, okay, your body will tend to have much more concentrated urine. This is very obvious by the color of the urine that you have. If your urine is almost clear, like watery in color, it's almost clear, that means you are very well hydrated, and your blood is more diluted. Your urine is more diluted. If you have very goldish or yellowish urine, okay, that typically means that you are less hydrated and your urine is more highly concentrated instead of watered down, so to speak. Okay. Water diuresis is drinking large volumes of water will produce large volumes of hypotonic urine. That's what I said before. If you're very hydrated, you'll have very clear urine. That's hypotonic, which means your urine has high water content. Okay. The cortical portion of your collecting duct reabsorbs salt, but it is impermeable to water, so therefore it'll make it much more watery in context. Okay. Dehydration will lead to the production of a hypertonic urine, okay, which means it'll have very little water in it. Okay, urine becomes much more concentrated. High blood osmolarity will stimulate pituitary to release ADH, which is antidiuretic hormone, and then an increase in synthesis of aquaporin channels by renal tubule cells, which will then have more water being reabsorbed by the collecting duct. Okay. If your blood pressure is low and you are dehydrated, your rate of filtration will be low. Okay. And therefore the filtrate will move more slowly, and therefore we'll have more time for reabsorption. More salt will be removed, more water will be reabsorbed, and less urine will be produced. Okay. And that is something we don't necessarily want. Okay. And that is where we're going to stop for today. The next lecture will pick up with what urine is made of, and then we'll go through the rest of the systems, the ureter, the urinary bladder, the urethra, things like that. So thanks for listening, and I will see you on the next lecture.